Under the gray morning sky of the hills surrounding Cililin in West Bandung, located in West Java, Indonesia, were still soaked from a week of unrelenting rainfall, the kind of heavy tropical rain that seemed to have no end. At first light, villagers noticed the river running faster, darker, carrying branches and debris that scraped against rocks as if warning of what was still coming. Nothing yet looked catastrophic, but something felt wrong. Hours later, those instincts would be proven right, as the Cibitung River, normally calm, sometimes even shallow in the dry season, would swell far beyond its banks and unleash one of the region's most destructive floods in years. At the heart of this tragedy stood four community sectors, for RW, whose homes and rice fields formed the backbone of local life, unaware that in just seconds, everything familiar would be swallowed by a violent surge of water. In the early afternoon, residents living close to the river noticed a strange vibration underfoot, followed by the sound of rushing water that felt too loud to be normal. People stepped outside to check, and some climbed onto higher ground to get a clearer view. They saw the river had risen suddenly, churning with mud, tree trunks, and torn-up vegetation. What none of them knew at that moment was that upstream, rainfall trapped between slopes had created a massive buildup and accumulation of runoff that had nowhere left to go. When it finally released, it shot downward like a liquid avalanche. The force was such that even before it emerged into view near the settlements, the noise alone had already forced some families to abandon their houses and run. Then came the eruption. The water burst forward in a single violent rush, breaking over the embankments and smashing into the first row of houses. People who had lived beside that river for generations had never seen anything like it. The flood wasn't a slow rise, it was an explosion. A wall of water that carried mud thick enough to bury structures, rocks large enough to crack walls, and debris sharp enough to tear through wood and bamboo as if they were nothing. It swept through the four affected RW in a broad, destructive sweep. Old pathways vanished instantly, scooters and tools were carried away, and entire living rooms disappeared beneath brown water that reached frightening heights within minutes. Those who were still in their homes heard the impact before they saw the water. Windows shattered. Doors bent backwards. Floors shook under the weight of the sudden pressure. Many dropped everything and ran, wading or swimming through the torrent, trying to reach higher ground while shouting warnings to those behind them. There were no emergency sirens, no evacuation alarms, just instinct, fear, and the sound of water tearing through the village with unstoppable momentum. The panic in the air was raw, immediate, and fully justified. Even the strongest adults struggled to keep their footing against the current, and the muddy water made every step unpredictable. Farther downstream, the famous tourist destination Lembah Gunung Putri was undergoing its own nightmare. Known normally as a peaceful natural retreat tucked between cliffs and forest, it had never been associated with danger. But as the flood waters traveled, the valley acted like a funnel, concentrating the current until it submerged large parts of the site. Footpaths disappeared, small stalls were ripped apart, and water swirled violently in places where families normally picnicked. The flood didn't just rise, it engulfed the landscape, turning a serene tourist valley into a scene of chaos. By the time residents noticed what was happening, escape routes were already underwater, forcing some people to climb trees or cling to elevated structures until rescuers could reach them. Meanwhile, another catastrophe unfolded in the rice fields, 5 full hectares of farmland that families depended on for their livelihood. The fields were the pride of many households, a patchwork of effort, routine, and generational knowledge. But as the muddy surge poured across them, the carefully planted rows vanished beneath the flood. Young rice shoots were uprooted and carried away. The soil, which should have been soft and controlled, was instead churned into deep, unstable sludge. Farmers who had spent weeks tending their crops could only watch as the labor of the season disappeared in a matter of minutes. The damage was not only immediate, it ensured future hardship as well, since the soil would take time to settle, dry, and recover. The loss wasn't just agricultural, it was economic, emotional, and deeply personal. In the residential areas, people fled carrying whatever they could grab: children, documents, a phone, a bag of clothes, while others had no time to save anything at all. Several houses, especially those closest to the river, were struck directly by logs and debris carried by the current. Walls crumbled, roofs collapsed, some homes were lifted from their foundations and pushed several meters before being smashed against others. Residents described the noise as deafening, a mix of rushing water, splitting wood, and crashing objects that drowned out everything else. Even from farther away, anyone listening could hear the overwhelming sound of destruction. For those who managed to climb to safer areas, the view was almost surreal. Streets that usually bustled with motorbikes and children playing were now part of the river. Landmarks were gone. Places that once held memories now seemed unrecognizable beneath swirling mud. People watched neighbors struggle in the water, reaching out for support, shouting for help, some slipping as they tried to save someone else. Anxiety ran high as families desperately tried to find one another amid the chaos. As the afternoon turned into evening, the rain refused to stop. Emergency teams began to mobilize, but the roads leading into the affected RW were difficult to access. The mud was too thick for vehicles, and in some places the water remained too deep. Rescuers had to proceed on foot, carrying ropes, stretchers, and basic medical supplies. They called out for survivors, scanning every partially submerged house and every tree where someone might have climbed to escape the flood. Residents formed their own rescue lines, linking arms to pull people from strong currents. Some used bamboo poles, others used spare wooden planks, anything long enough to reach someone struggling. The situation grew more difficult as night fell, because the region had lost power in the chaos. Darkness made everything more dangerous. Without lights, without electricity, navigating the waterlogged landscape became nearly impossible. The sound of water continued to echo through the valleys, but now it blended with crying, calling, and the clamor of rescue attempts in the dark. The only illumination came from a few flashlights, the occasional phone with battery remaining, and emergency lamps carried by responders. In the submerged tourist valley, stranded visitors and workers huddled together on elevated areas waiting for help. Cold, soaked, and exhausted, they listened as branches snapped in the forest above them, unsure whether another surge might come. The uncertainty weighed heavily on everyone. The rescue teams who finally reached them had to carefully navigate debris and shifting currents. But eventually, little by little, people were brought to safety, guided out of the valley toward dry ground. Back in the village, families were relocated to temporary shelters, schools, community halls, any place with a dry floor and a roof intact. Volunteers distributed food, blankets, and dry clothing. Those who had escaped with nothing sat quietly in shock, still processing how much their lives had changed in a single afternoon. Conversations unfolded slowly as people recounted what they had seen, what they had lost, and whom they were still searching for. Others spoke about past floods, but none could recall anything this sudden or this destructive. By dawn on December 5th, the worst of the floodwaters had begun to recede, revealing the full extent of the devastation. Thick mud covered roads and courtyards. Furniture lay scattered. Motorbikes were buried halfway in sludge. The smell of disturbed earth filled the air. Residents walked through what remained of their homes, stepping carefully, examining what could be saved. Children clung to their parents, taking in the scene with wide, confused eyes. Adults tried to appear strong, but the weight of loss was visible on every face. Officials surveyed the impact. 4RW significantly damaged, 5 hectares of rice fields destroyed, the tourist area submerged, and numerous homes rendered uninhabitable. The emotional and economic cost would last far longer than the flood itself. Yet amidst the destruction, there was resilience. Neighbors worked together to clear debris. Community kitchens formed, offering meals to anyone in need. People who had lost nearly everything still helped others search for missing belongings. The flood that struck Cililin and the surrounding West Bandung region was not just a natural disaster, it was a moment that exposed vulnerability but also highlighted the strength of community bonds. It showed how quickly life can change, how fragile the familiar can be when nature unleashes its full power. But it also showed how people, even in their most difficult hours, come together, protect one another, and begin the long process of rebuilding. In the days that followed, while authorities assessed long-term recovery needs and families started to organize what remained of their possessions, one truth remained clear. The events of December 4th and 5th, 2025 would be remembered for years as one of the most sudden and overwhelming floods to strike the region. A moment when the Cibitung River, pushed beyond its limits by unrelenting rain, carved its terrifying path through Cililin, through its homes, its fields, and its valley, leaving behind stories of fear, survival, devastation, and the enduring determination to return, rebuild, and recover. As the hours continued to pass, the situation across Bandung only grew more chaotic, revealing the true scale of this natural disaster. In several neighborhoods, residents who initially believed the water would recede quickly now found themselves trapped on the second floors of their homes. Many of them used bedsheets, towels, or broken wooden planks to wave desperately at passing rescue teams. The relentless heavy rain made visibility poor, slowing down every attempt at evacuation. Emergency responders struggled to navigate the flooded streets as strong currents shoved their boats sideways, forcing them to cling to electrical poles and street signs to stabilize their paths. Throughout the city, the soundscape of the disaster intensified. The continuous roar of rain hitting rooftops and waterlogged streets, distant sirens merging with the shouts of families calling out to loved ones, and the thunder echoing across the valley where Bandung sits. The storm clouds remained low and heavy, giving the sky a bruised, metallic tone that cast an eerie dimness over the city even in daytime. Water levels